Okay, I'm getting word that we should go ahead and start this. So, to start with, I'm Lakin. I'm one of the Lichess developers. I don't actually do that much development for Lichess these days just because I tend to be quite busy. But I always want to do more for Lichess, and the reason why this is titled Lakin Learns Leela as opposed to Lakin Teaches Leela is both because I like alliteration as well as because in some ways I'm going to be learning with you. Some of the stuff I'm going to do today I'm going to do live, and I'm going to run into problems and we're going to fix them together. And I'm going to sort of answer questions, and a lot of the questions that you ask will be stuff that I'll have to learn about on stream just to try and figure it out. So that's part of what we're doing today. The other thing, I'll just give you a quick overview of what I'm planning on. Oops, that's annoying. We'll just go straight to this. The quick overview that I'm planning on doing for today is, I just doxed my own email address, because apparently when you switch slides using Google Chrome, Google Remote Share, it does that, which is kind of fun, which I didn't realize. So you guys can all email me at the end of the stream and tell me how much you loved it or hated it. But the plan for today will be to cover just sort of a tour of the repos. So that's the sort of first thing we'll do, and let's actually go here to talk about that. So there's a lot of source code that goes into Lichess specifically, and we'll just go through kind of what those ones exist, what exists, and what they're used for, and kind of what their point is, and how you can work on them. Primarily, depending on what you're trying to do, you probably won't actually touch most of them. There's probably one primary one that you'll use, which is the Leela, this one, and then the Leela modules as well, and the Leela UE. Those are the primary ones you'll use. But we'll go through all of that. After that, I'm going to do my best to actually set up a local development environment for Lichess, and from there we'll see how long that takes, because if it might be, and I might actually take me all stream. That might be what we end up spending the entire stream on, but hopefully that doesn't take all stream. If it doesn't take all stream, then the next thing that we'll talk a little bit about is I will actually talk a little bit about the development workflow that you can use with Leela, and talk about some of the sort of tools that you can use, and how you use them, and the various commands you can run, and what they mean and what they do. And then, if we have time, and this is probably the final piece, I will likely spend some time talking about the basic organization of the Leela code base. And just some very high level organization, just take you through a really very quick tour of it. So that'll be the final thing. And we have our first confused person. Lud is confused, and he doesn't understand what is happening. This is not Thibaut. And yes, I know this is a chess site. But this is a stream about coding for Lichess, not a stream about actually playing chess. So if you're here to watch me play chess, you are in the wrong place. For today, I'm going to focus on just how to code for Lichess. Okay, with that out of the way, let's start with the sort of tour of the code base. So if you go to lichess.org/source, which is the URL we have here, you get a page which is and let's actually make this page full screen just so you see it all. You get a page which lists all of the source code for Lichess. And I'm also going to very quickly close my blinds so that you don't get quite as much glare on the camera. There we go. There, the camera should be a little bit better now. So this is the code that runs Lichess. The primary code, like when I load this page specifically, or when I load, say, the home page of Lichess as well, the primary repository and code base that you're actually using is this Leela code base here. And this is the primary code base that we'll be talking about today. So I'll open that in a new tab. Leela has a number of different components. It has a backend modules, which are all written in Scala. And then it has its front-end modules, which are primarily TypeScript. And I think there might be a little bit of JavaScript left in a few places, just raw JavaScript, but for the most part, it's all TypeScript. And then Sass is used for the CSS and for the design. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But behind the scenes, Lichess uses a lot of other pieces of software to run the services. One of the other primary ones used on the main server is called Scala Chess. And this is a library which implements the various chess rules. So For example, the main chess rules to chess 960 rules, all the variant rules are implemented on top of Scala chess. The compression algorithm, the compression repo that's listed as the fifth one is not one that we'll talk about much today. It's primarily just for having efficient storage of the moves and the clock times, written in Java. I would estimate that probably 99.99% of developers won't need to look at that ever. The other one, which is quite interesting though for the front end, is ChessGround, which is the one that actually implements the chessboard. So if we go to this one here and scroll down, it's the one that actually allows you to see all of this sort of stuff. And so that's a really important one, and that is one that, again, primarily you won't actually be developing on it, but it's good to know that it exists, and that's what it's there for. Finally, there's a large number of repositories related to Stockfish, to allowing Stockfish to run in your browser. So when you're on Lichess, let's move this back to here, and you're on, say, the analysis board, and you click this button here, the engine that runs on your browser and gives you the Stockfish analysis in your browser comes from this set of repositories, this one here. Finally, for the main server, another one that's very important is this ChessOps, which is client-side chess rules implementation. So it implements the chess rules similar to Scala chess, which does it for the back end. It does the rules for the front end for TypeScript and stuff like that. Again, we probably won't get into too many details with this one as well too. Moving on, the other ones which are important down here, and I'm not going to go through each of these line by line because there's too many, but the primary ones that you'll need to know about are this Lila WS. And this one's actually probably the one that causes most people to stumble when they're trying to set it up. And the reason why is because it's required in order to play games on your local development environment. But it's also not one that you're going to spend a lot of time using for most development tasks. So we'll talk about this one a little bit more in a few minutes. The rest of these are all various external services which do various things. Like when you ask for to play against the computer, this Lila Fishnet is involved. When you're doing searching for studies or searching for positions or searching for games, this one's involved. When you use the Open Explorer, it's this one. The table base is this one. This is used for web push for mobile, and so on and so forth. And if you want to go through each of these in depth, you can yourself. I'm not going to go through them. But down here, and the final ones I'll talk about very quickly, is the mobile app. All the mobile app repos are listed here as well too. So for those of you who are interested in mobile development, that's also available. And then there's a few more interesting docs and utilities that you can use down here as well too. Some of these aren't actually used anymore. I think this one's actually gone. I think our most recent successful technical tweet was us removing this one from it. So I think we actually need to remove that from the list as well too. More importantly, actually, for this lichess.org source page, something a lot of people don't realize is that Lila actually advertises which version is currently deployed. So, from that perspective, this is a very useful page to come to understand exactly what's been deployed and what's been properly deployed everywhere as well too. Just asking some questions of some of my managers here in terms of the video on demand and recording. Okay, so going back to this is important because you can kind of understand the Lichess actually uses one thing that's slightly different about development of Lila is that most development happens in this master branch here. And in fact, I shouldn't say most development happens in the master branch. A lot of development happens in branches and then gets merged into the master branch, but sometimes the master branch actually isn't 100% deployable. And so if you check out the latest version of the code for Lila and it's not working, sometimes you need to be able to roll back and figure out which version is actually deployed. And this helps you do this. This actually lists the specific version that's deployed. So we click this link, it opens up the page. You can see the current version that is deployed. You can see that that version was coded on October 6th. You can see that it was deployed. The uptime is boots 5 days ago, which means that it was deployed on October 6th as well. And so that helps you understand sort of what versions to use. And the front-end sort of assets code, the stuff that actually gives you the JavaScript for all this, is listed here as well too. Okay, so that was the general tour of which repos are involved in the Lichess software, and I figured I'd stop here and just actually take some questions, because I'm not sure if people are lost or if I'm sort of making sense at this point in time, and I also don't want to go particularly quickly, because I want to make sure that people actually understand what's going on at every step of the way. So anybody have any questions at the moment? Floyd asked a question about a changelog published for every deploy. There is not an official changelog published for every deploy, but you can use this link as an unofficial one. So the only problem with using this link as an unofficial one is that when you click here, you can see all of the commits which are deployed. So I can see that this fixing non-exhaustive search was deployed, adding color to bot title and search. And I can go through all of these things. What I can't see very easily from this particular page is what was the previous version that was deployed. So I can't tell whether this was the previous version that was deployed, and so everything from here up is new, or if perhaps this was the previous version that was deployed and everything from here up was new. So that's one thing that you can use for this right now. We've had a lot of requests recently for a better changelog version of this sort of stuff, and I think that's actually something that we should move towards, but keeping track of specific changelogs as a developer is one of my least favorite tasks. I suspect that Thibaut feels the same way, and so from that perspective, I can't promise that it's going to happen. We'll have a better changelog version. So a couple of other questions here that we've had. We've had one about a changelog for things, a feature request place to track feature requests. Right now, the best place for feature requests is the issues on the Lila repository. So if you click issues, you get a version of all the issues. There are 486 currently open, and these issues are a combination of bug reports and feature requests as well too. So Thibaut is very active on the GitHub. So most of the stuff that you see here is stuff that he's probably read. Like the one filed 4 hours ago, he may not have read specifically yet, but I guarantee you everything that's below this from the 5 days ago and older, all of these he's read and actually had a look at. Because he's super active on it. We also try and maintain a number of different labels, which are important here as well too. And some of the labels that we maintain are things for like bugs specifically, which is interesting. But the other interesting ones that I'll talk about is this good first issue label. So if you're looking to be involved, you can look for these good first issues. And what happens is some of the developers will note that these are slightly easier things that might be easier to pick up as a first issue. There's not usually a lot of these in place, but that's also because we actually don't have a ton of new developers constantly jumping on board. But we definitely try and keep this up to date. One of the other ones that's interesting as well too is this wanted tag. So any issue that's been filed and has this wanted tag on it usually means that one of the developers has looked at it and said, yes, we want this. So if you're looking for something to actually work on, then this list of wanted tickets is actually one of the best lists for you to work through, because we know we want it. For example, we want a user games download UE. This one's been around forever. And in fact, this one's a good example to use because Thibaut's actually gone out of his way to explain it. He's also actually provided a starting point in terms of a branch, and also provided some examples of ones that have currently been worked on. And some people have tried to work on this one but haven't actually been successful in it. But this would be an example of a good issue for you to actually pick up. In terms of, so one of the big current development needs is a question that's come up. I didn't actually see the question specifically, but it's been passed along to me from my handlers, as I'm going to refer to them from now on. So I think that from a big development need perspective, Lichess is actually in a really good spot right now in terms of technical debt. The past 1.5 to 2 years, we've actually spent a lot of time working on trying to upgrade the development environments, get it to be easy to use, to fix some of the old spots where we knew we had performance issues and we knew we weren't going to be able to scale. In addition, the COVID situation has actually forced us to do that as well too. When COVID first hit, we ended up with way more traffic than we were expecting in the first 3 or 4 months. And if you guys, I'm sure the people who are here will remember the fact that we struggled with hosting a couple of tournaments. So sometimes we'd have issues with tournaments during the busiest times of the day because we were suddenly at 90K or even closer to 100K, I think, active users on the site during that period of time. When previous to this, we were, hitting 50K or 60K, I think, if I remember the stats correctly. So from that perspective, big development needs is something that's going to be difficult to answer. We don't have super large, like we aren't sitting here saying, oh yeah, we need somebody who understands this particular subject really well in order to deal with it. On the other hand, as someone here has pointed out, Thibaut has done an amazing job to get Lichess to the point it is with being basically a single developer. We have other people who help. We have a ton of people who help. Revu for Nicholas on GitHub has done a ton of work as well too. Isaac did a ton of work for a while back. We have Todovsky in the chat here has done a ton of work on Stockfish and variants for Stockfish. One of the other people in the chat here is one of our primary sysadmins. So we have a ton of people who are helping, but except for Thibaut for the most part, we don't actually pay any other developers. So we have one full-time developer. So my answer to the biggest current development needs is we need more people who are willing to donate time to fix small issues, to fix small things, to take care of, like if something's not quite working right in some esoteric browser and we need to do some small CSS fix for it. People who can track down that sort of stuff. Someone who is willing to put some time and effort into, I don't know, more efficient or refactoring certain aspects of the architecture and stuff like that. We'll talk about the architecture here actually in a few minutes. But yeah, that would be my biggest answer for what's the biggest development needs. I don't know if that fully answered your question, whoever asked that, but and I'll ask the people who paste the questions in here to include names so I can thank them for the answer for the question. So, any other questions in terms of this before I move on to the next step on this thing? I'm not used to talking for long periods of time on end. I usually sit in my basement and ignore people, so I'm going to have to stop and have small breaks and drink some water every once in a while. One question here is, can everyone help? I think everyone can help Lichess. This stream is about development. And if you are someone who has no development skills currently, then helping us with the development is going to be difficult. Lichess isn't a good first project. So if you're someone who's just brand new at developing, then jumping into Lichess can be quite difficult and quite daunting. On the other hand, we are also trying very hard to encourage those people to still get involved in some way. You can still help us in certain ways. For example, you can help us triage bugs. So you can stay active on the issues page, make sure that read the issues, and if we're having trouble, say, reproducing them, maybe you can try and help us reproduce it. Or you can stay active in the forums and look for what people are saying in terms of what bugs are being filed, and actually make sure that you can reproduce them as well too, and help direct people to file an issue if it's a real bug. Because sometimes I think that's actually important as well too. And as well, one of the other things that I'll point out that we're also trying to do as well is we're actually trying to foster a little bit of a development community in our Discord. So if you go to, let's go back to Lichess here, and you go to the main page, and you scroll down to here, we actually have a Discord which you can join, and the link and invite link is here. And in that Discord, we actually have a channel which is called, and I'll show you this here, called How to Set Up Leela. And in this channel, we encourage people who are trying to get involved to come and start asking questions there. And we do our best to answer questions reasonably well and reasonably quickly, but that'd be a good place for you to get involved in terms of how to get involved. I got kind of off topic there because my main point that I wanted to make is even if you're not a developer, there are things you can do to help Lichess. So I'm not going to cover those in depth today because I'm not as involved with that aspect, but if you're interested in helping, there are ways to help. Maybe post a question on the forum in terms of how you can get involved, or just start monitoring what we do on a regular basis and figuring out sort of how that works, and maybe finding a way to involve yourself that way. All right. One of the biggest questions I have here is, I assume there are some people here who are possible to count the number of unique games played. I think it probably is possible to count that, but it's probably not an easy question to answer. In terms of answering that question, SPX, I will also show you something that's also quite useful about Lichess, which I think is very interesting, which is there is this database.lichess.org site. And here is where we export all of our standard rated games in PGN format. So if you're interested in knowing the number of unique games played on Lichess, you can go here and download the, how many gigs is it now? 375 gigs of games zipped, well, BZ2. So it's a huge list of games, and you can go through there and find out how many unique games we've actually played. So, and this is an interesting aspect of Lichess in comparison to, I think, a lot of the other chess platforms out here, is that 99% of our code and most of our data is open in some way. I mean, obviously our data in terms of personally identifying information for users, their communications, their messages, stuff like that, that can't be open. But when it comes to the actual chess information, there's a lot you can do just by looking around the GitHub and looking at all the different repositories and looking at the data we have as well too. Another example of a good piece of information to know about is if you go to lichess.org/API, Lichess actually has a very fully featured API as well too. So this is the API. So if you're looking to build something on Lichess, and that's actually an interesting thing in terms of talking about the feature requests that we often get. We get a lot of feature requests. We get them on Discord, we get them on GitHub, we get them in the forums, we get a ton of feature requests. Oftentimes people see us as being a little bit, I shouldn't say that, I shouldn't say oftentimes people, I don't know how people see us, but I feel like we are frequently declining certain features because they're hard to implement, or they're difficult to maintain, or they'll be the value you get for the small amount of users that will actually use that is fairly small. But here's the little trick that I'll tell you about if you want to see something implemented related to Lichess. If you can change that feature request into an API request, and a reason why you would use that API to build the feature you're looking for, you're much more likely to get TiVo's interest, because the more we can build simple things like an API request here, so some way of actually just basically saying, here's the data you wanted, here's the way of doing what you wanted on Lichess, and then someone else actually builds that feature on top of Lichess, that is a far more scalable way for us to deal with this sort of stuff. So in terms of that, if you're looking for something to do with, in terms of helping Lichess as well too, you can help build interesting things based on top of the APIs that we have. In fact, something that was really interesting to me that was posted recently, I don't know if someone has an easy link to this, but someone on the Discord made an all-time points leader list for different types of tournaments based off of the Lichess API and the database information we had. And that's an example of a page that we might not, and if someone has that link, I would actually like to show it. Where was that? Let me see if I can find that link really quickly. Here we go, I found it. So let's pull this up. So this is all hyperbullet arenas, and you can see for all hyperbullet arenas who has the highest score on this. And it has all sorts of information, so this is for all. You can filter for just 2020 or 2019 or hourly, monthly, yearly sort of thing. And this is a really, in my opinion, sort of really interesting point is that asking for features like this, you might get told no. We might not want to actually try and maintain the code to do this feature because I'm not sure how many people are actually interested in this data. It might only be a small perspective. But if you can ask for the API to make sure that you can get this aspect, then to get this data, then you can actually process it and build the feature yourself, then you're far more likely to get us to play along with you. So this is a really interesting thing. And I think these sorts of things are the sort of thing that I would also recommend as a way of getting involved, is to try and find a way to be involved in terms of just being involved in the community in general and helping people that way and stuff like that. So Okay, that is the bulk of my introduction and sort of general tour. If we don't have any other questions, I'm going to attempt something that I would recommend no one ever does on stream, which is to try and set something up live that they haven't practiced beforehand. So I'm going to actually try and set up the Lichess development environment now. And I'm going to do it from scratch using a raw Ubuntu install if Vagrant plays along. So I was trying to test this really quickly before the stream started, and Vagrant was not playing along. So from that perspective, I may try this with Vagrant and actually fail very quickly. And if that's the case, I will go through the setup just locally on my own machine, which is a little bit less interesting because I already have everything set up on my local machine. So each step in that process might actually be a little bit easier, but we'll try that. Okay, so going back to here. So the first page that you should visit when you're looking at trying to set stuff up is this wiki page. So we have a wiki. We try and keep it up to date. It's not always 100% up to date, but we have two links here which are kind of interesting, which is that how to set up a Leela development environment on Linux and how to set up a Leela development environment on Windows. The Windows one is less well maintained, so if you're on Windows and you want to try and set this up, then you're a little bit more on your own. There's a little bit, none of the core developers use Windows to develop. I don't, Thibaut doesn't, Nicholas doesn't, so from that perspective, the Windows setup is definitely not as well tested. And we have our primary system in here saying that we should try Kubernetes to set it up. So I would love to use Kubernetes to set it up if I had any idea what Kubernetes does. All I know is it's a fancy word that usually goes with Docker and containers. And if I knew it really well, it might get me a very high-paying job in Silicon Valley. So I'm not going to actually tell you to set that up that way. But these instructions for Linux are actually fairly well maintained. So these ones are actually quite good. The very first thing just to think about is to join the Discord, potentially join this channel, and you can ask questions there. We have apparently an IRC. It's apparently still listed here, but I certainly don't visit it anymore, so I wouldn't recommend using that as your primary way of asking questions. I think the Discord is much more used. So from that perspective, that's where I'd ask for questions. And I'll go through this list of instructions sort of start to finish here just to talk about it briefly, and then we'll start actually trying to implement this. So we have a list of the different tools and dependencies you need. So a lot of these are stuff that if you're a developer, you already know about. Git is just basically how you get the code from GitHub. I know you're trolling, Luca. I just like playing along, pretending like I don't know what's going on. Anyways, SBT, let's actually Google that really quickly. SBT is the interactive build tool. So SBT is a way of building things for Scala. So if you're working in Scala, it's a nice way of building things. It actually also works for Java, and honestly, it's a way better build tool for Java than any of the other ones I've ever tried for Java as well too. But Lichess, all of the Lichess Scala repositories use SBT, so you'll be installing that. Node is a JavaScript-based networking / development / scripting tool language. Environment, I guess would be the better word. And this is how all of our front-end stuff is coded and built. Yarn is a dependency manager for Node, so it's the way you install dependencies. In the context of Scala, SBT does the dependency management for you. Gulp CLI is a Node tool, which is what we use to build our CSS and JavaScript. So from that perspective, this will be something that will come into play when we get to the point where we want to actually do CSS development. And finally, you need a Java runtime environment. Scala is, and let's just Google Scala really quickly. So the Scala programming language, if you want to pick a fight with Thibaut, the best thing you can do about it is tell him that Scala is an object-oriented programming language. He loves having that conversation, just loves it. So if you want to have a conversation with him, you can start from that. But Scala is a programming language that runs on the JVM, so the Java Virtual Machine. It allows you to actually use all of the various Java libraries and dependencies that you might want to use, which makes it really interesting from that perspective, and we make heavy use of that. So the Scala, we in terms of like our the compression and a bunch of other tools we use are actually written in Java. In addition, we have a number of other dependencies written in Java. In terms of Scala, specifically how it works with the JVM, this part's way more important for it because Thibault is very much a functional programmer. He loves the idea of data immutability and using static types to make sure he makes less mistakes. In specifically this reason, Scala's static types helps avoid bugs in complex applications. This is why we use this. So it allows us to make sure that we're not doing anything really silly. But yeah, so you'll need, and this runs on top of a JVM, so you'll need a Java development environment to go with that as well too, which is where this comes from. In addition to that, the primary infrastructure you need to be able to run a local development environment is you need Mongo database, so you need to install Mongo, and you need to run Mongo, because Mongo needs to be running in order for Lila to connect to it. And that'll be where most of the data is stored in your local development environment. In addition, you'll also need Redis, which is a key value store that's quite fast, which is how Lila actually communicates with one or two of the other services that we use internally. And then from here on out, the installation, this is just a series of commands that you need to run in order to be able to do it. And if you've gotten all of these dependencies properly installed locally, this should be as much as you need to get the basics of Lichess set up. So that's going to be our first goal today, is I'm going to try and get a new Ubuntu install to the point where I can run this. Okay, and once again, I'll apologize for the loudness of my keyboard. I'm actually going to switch this back to Bionic 64 because I was having problems with the previous one. So I'm going to use Vagrant, and Vagrant is basically development environments made easy. And the idea behind Vagrant, it is a mechanical keyboard, yes. Here, I'll even show it to you because I'm very proud of it. There you go. This is the keyboard we are using today. Okay, done with that. And Lucas really loves this keyboard. He thinks it's the best thing ever. He wishes, he has a recording of it that he made the last time I visited him, and he plays it whenever he needs to fall asleep. So, anyways, back to the actual real thing that we're trying to talk about today. Vagrant, I'm going to use it. I don't actually use Vagrant for my own development environment, and I don't do it because Vagrant is going to actually make a few things that we're trying to do harder. Resetting the webcam source. Okay, I have instructions that apparently my audio and video are out of sync, but I'm not sure how important it is for me to try and fix that. Okay, I'm getting word that it's fine. I'm not going to worry about it. If it gets too bad, maybe I'll just turn off the video, although people say they love looking at my wonderful face, so I wouldn't want to deprive them of that. Okay, back to what we're actually trying to do here as opposed to looking at my face. I'm going to use Vagrant today because I want to start from something from scratch, so that I'm starting from a position where someone else might start and they don't already have a ton of configuration, because I put a lot of time and effort into my configuration locally. I actually develop locally on Linux, and I want to stop really quickly and say that if you have Linux available, or if you're looking to become a serious contributor to Lichess, having it run directly on Linux locally is much nicer than having it run in a virtual environment. The actual compilation step of compiling everything necessary to run Lila actually does take quite a bit of memory and computing power. And from that perspective, it's far easier if you're running it completely natively on your actual computer as opposed to in a virtual environment. So from that perspective, definitely consider that. The primary developers use Arch Linux. So if you're someone who's familiar with Arch Linux, you can get it set up that way. We know it all works there. On the other hand, most of our deployed software actually runs on Ubuntu. So we also know that it works on Ubuntu as well too. And so that's what I'm going to actually be using today. So I'm going to be using Ubuntu, and I'm going to use Bionic 64 because I've had zero luck with the new Focal 64. So I'm going to start from that. And Vagrant, I'm not going to go through all of the Vagrant commands in detail today because this is not the point. But Vagrant up is the way you initially bring up a development environment using Vagrant. In fact, I think I need to do one other thing very quickly that I should do before I continue on. And that is this. This is something I should consider doing. Actually, no, I can change the memory later. That's fine. Okay. So this is basically just making a virtual machine, downloading and installing Ubuntu, and that's the sort of starting point that we're gonna start from. I've used 2004 for things tactics, but not specifically for Ubuntu development, or sorry, for Lichess development. So from that perspective, I can't tell you for sure it'll work. I suspect it will. Okay, so this Vagrant now is running. And so I do a Vagrant SSH. This is how you connect to the Vagrant. I should get a working Ubuntu install for 1804. So one of the things Vagrant does is it sets up your user to be user Vagrant, and it provides sudo access. You can run sudo commands without a password. This is nice in a development perspective. If you really want to argue about how useful sudo is, you can talk to Lucas about that. He loves that conversation as well. The very first thing I'm going to do in here is run an update command, which just basically updates the information about which software is available. And then after that, I'm going to actually upgrade to the latest software across the board. And hopefully this doesn't take too long. I have a fast connection, so I'm hoping we can go through this pretty quickly. And the command to upgrade with Ubuntu is this one. So yeah, we'll update a bunch of stuff. So we'll let that run in the background for right now. And we'll go back to talking about the dependencies. So I'm going to close a few tabs here really quickly. Close that one, that one, that one, and let's go back to here. So Git is very easy to install using Ubuntu, but if you want to make sure you have the latest versions of the rest of these things, there's a few different ways of actually doing that in Ubuntu. You can use the apt-get method, which installs the sort of official versions for Ubuntu. However, sometimes those versions can actually be a little bit behind in terms of if you're using an older version, like the 1804 version of Ubuntu. We're not going to have the latest software in there, so we might have an older version of the software. So from that perspective, I actually recommend looking for alternative ways to install each of these things that are allow you to keep it up to date. A few other things I'll point out as well too is that sometimes you actually want to be able to switch between versions of Java or versions of Node or versions of Yarn, and in those particular cases, it's particularly useful if you can find a way of installing this that allows you to very easily switch between those environments. And so I'm going to show you how to do that specifically for Node and specifically for Java. The first thing I will Google is Ubuntu SBT install. And we find a link for installing it on Linux. And it requires us to have the JDK installed as well too. So from that perspective, I'm going to install the JDK first. You could Google this as well too in terms of how to do this, but I'm going to specifically recommend that you consider using, if you're on Linux, consider using something called Jabba, J-A-B-B-A, which is this nice little tool that allows you to install and actually use different versions of Java just directly in your own home directory. So I'm going to recommend you do something with this particular set of thing that you should never do in general. You should never just randomly download SH scripts and then run them, because especially if they have a sudo command in them, because you never know what they're going to do. But if you trust a particular repository enough, this sort of thing is not so bad. So let's start with that. So we'll copy and paste that over here. This will download Java. Okay. So the idea here is that if I log back out and log back in, I should now have a Java command, which I can run to do things like this. And Java ls remote, the command I just ran, lists the different versions of the JVM that are available. And the one that I'm going to recommend you use is this one here, this OpenJDK. We use OpenJDK for Lichess, and that is what we deploy on, that is what we run. So OpenJDK is definitely sufficient. The primary thing here right now is that we're currently on version 1.14. So that's really the important thing. These older ones will no longer work. And I believe that is listed in the Lichess thing here. Oh no, apparently, according to this, 11 will still work. I don't know if I believe that anymore. That might be something we need to update. I'm going to install this one. And so Java basically says that you can do, how do we do the install here? Blah, 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 all that's installed, ls remote, here we go. So we type in Java install this. It will download and install the OpenJDK. Version 13 is what's required, Lucas. I thought we were on 14 now for some reason. I thought that was the appropriate version based on my recollection. Oh, I know what it is. For building, you need 14. For running, you can run on 13. I think that's the difference. That we may actually make use of something, or we test the build in 14, as far as I understand. But running, because that's the beauty of the JVM when it works, is that you can build and run on different versions. Okay. Yeah, I tried 2004 as well too with Vagrant Todovsky, and that did not work at all for me. So I would not recommend it. So in order to make sure you're using a particular version, we're going to say use, and then the same piece of thing. And now we have a Java here. We can type in Java version. It confirms that we're running the right version. Okay, great. So we have one piece of software down. So we've installed a JDK, so we need to skip all of that. Now we just need to install the appropriate SBT. So Ubuntu and Debian typically have the same instructions, which you can use, and we'll use those for right now. This particular line, what it's doing is adding a source of software to your set of available software. And so we'll do that. That should be fine. What this does is creates a file here, which basically says we can get software from this location. This is basically saying we're going to look up the appropriate encryption keys that this software will be encrypted with and add them to our keyring so that we know they're trusted. And then we will update the record of which software is available. And then finally, we will install SBT. And that shouldn't take too long. And now we have a version of SBT here available too as well. So let's make a directory temp, go in there, type in SBT. And now SBT is doing whatever it does by default when it runs. So that's fine. You don't have to, this step is just me showing you that SBT is actually installed. I'm going to color that. I'm going to remove everything that's in temp. That's done. Okay, so going back to the instructions. We also need Git. I forgot about Git. Git, I would just recommend installing using apt-get. There's no reason you need the latest, greatest version for Git. That's perfectly fine. And now we need a version of Node. And similar to the way we installed Java using this sort of environment manager, I would also recommend you use a version manager for Node. And there are a few of these. There's one called FNM, which is actually quite fast and I use. It's a bit harder to set up though, so I'm not going to suggest you necessarily use that. NVM is the most well-known one and the easiest one to set up. So I'm going to set up NVM right now. And that would be what I recommend you set up if you're not sure exactly what you're doing. And we'll do the same thing, copy and paste something that downloads code from the internet and runs it on a machine. Okay, so let's look here. It also adds it here, so we should have NVM now. Yeah, oh, no we don't. That's right, I have to log out and log back in very quickly. Now we have NVM. And so let's look at the commands we can use with NVM here. Scroll down a little bit. And I'm going to look up as well too, node.js. Let's look up Node and figure out what the most recent version is. So the most recent version is that. So let's try that. NVM install Node. Okay, it's going to use 14. 14 is probably fine. To answer a question, in Vagrant, currently, I am using Bash, yes. I don't use Bash or ZSH right now. Locally, I use Fish because I like a few of the features that it's using. Fish is not a POSIX-compatible shell, so I don't recommend it for everyone, but definitely Bash. Bash is not my favorite, but Bash is perfectly acceptable for right now. Okay, so supposedly we have Node running, and how do I... Yeah, NVM used, so I'm just going to say NVM use 14.3.1, and so now we have a version of Node as well, so just going to run Node. Great. And now, let's go back to the list of things we need to install. Here, we need Yarn. So let's use this one. Yarn's doesn't have a version manager typically, so its version doesn't matter as much, but I'm just going to install it the way it recommends, which is this way. Again, downloading random, oh, this is downloading the PGP code, but downloading code, adding a source, update. For me, my strong opinion on Vagrant versus Docker is avoid both of them like the plague if you possibly can, and learn Linux and use it directly as your development environment. But I will readily admit that that is not really the most popular opinion. If you want to use Mac, you want to use Windows, you're going to have to figure out how to use one of those two in terms of your dev environment. But for something like Lila, which is as complicated as it is far easier to just natively develop in Linux. In this particular perspective, I isolate my development environments by using these version manager tools. So Node isolates my environment to the NVM, and then Java isolates my environment for Java, and so on and so forth. That is correct, Mr. True Gamer. The idea behind Vagrant is that it's a true VM, it's a full VM, it's actually running in VirtualBox, and Docker is supposed to be lighter than that. So I've never had any luck getting Docker running. I've never tried very hard either, but it's never been very easy for me. Going back to Black Jumbo's question really quickly, can you set this up in WSL2? I don't know the answer to that question. If you go back to here and you click on Windows, these instructions are from IJH, and he did it using WSL1. So these particular set of combinations allow you to do on WSL1. I don't see any reason why WSL2 wouldn't work, but I don't actually know exactly what problems you might run into. The hardest thing that we've had with people using this is that when you share files back and forth between WSL and Windows, you run into some problems that way, as well as MongoDB and Redis don't run very well in WSL, and people have had better luck actually just installing Mongo and Redis directly in Windows and running them there, and then using WSL just for these sorts of things. So, all right, going back to this, we now have to install Yarn. So now let's finish the install for Yarn. That's NVM, not Yarn. That's Java. Let's close that. Let's close that. Let's close that. Here we go here, and then run this command. All this is doing again is just updating the software, installing Yarn. Mr. True Gamer, the real reason why is because I've been using Vagrant for like 8 years, and I know it reasonably well, and I don't know Docker at all. So you can chalk it up to my ignorance of Docker. That's the reason why Docker is harder for me. And as well as the fact that Vagrant, I don't know why I trust Vagrant slightly more. I just prefer those full environments as opposed to something that's sort of pseudo native pseudo VM. I don't know why I don't trust it, but it just seems a little bit more finicky to me. There's no reason why you couldn't use Docker though. Go for it. There is actually a, I think it's called Lichess, which is a really awkward name in my opinion because it's too close to the word choker, but that's fine. This guy, Brandon, has started a project called Lichess, but it's pretty out of date, and I've never really known anybody to have it working and keep it working. So if you like Docker and you'd like to actually help us maintain this, this is a very good example of something that I'd love for someone else to help maintain. So if someone can get Docker set up, get it working, and properly deal with everything else that you want to deal with, that would be great. Because if we had a working Docker environment for people to develop with, that'd be super awesome. But I don't know it well enough, so I can't be the one who's helping you do that. And someone else pointed out that Vagrant needs more resources. That is true, and in that particular perspective, it's a good point, which is why I recommend developing native, because the more you can use your the more you can use your local environment, your local resources, the better off you'll be in this particular development environment. I'm going to ignore that last question. Okay, back to where we were. So we have Git installed. We have SBT installed. we have Node installed, we have Yarn installed, gulp CLI. This is super useful, so I'm actually going to run this. I actually don't run gulp this way myself locally because this actually installs it using Yarn globally. And my personal opinion on that is that if you can, you should isolate all of your non-core OS ways of installing things into your home directory, because that's much easier to maintain your OS for a long period of time. So from that perspective, I prefer to have gulp CLI installed in a different manner. But this is perfectly valid as well too. So let's do that. Let Yarn do its thing. It is a virtual env-like behavior, yes. That is exactly the way Node isolates. So in a Node, so if I make a directory here, temp, and I go in temp, and I say yarn install dev gulp. So what it actually does is it makes a node modules directory here. And this node modules, oops, let's do that. I like the tree command for showing directory structure, so we'll use that. So this node modules is a directory which will have all of the dependencies properly. In this particular case, I think gulp was already installed globally, so let's try installing something else. Yarn install dev, what's another one? Slack web. So apparently Yarn's not appreciating my current. Oh, because I don't have packages.json. Anyways, the point I was going to make, it puts all of its dependencies in this directory here. One thing to keep in mind is if you are using Windows as your host, both in Docker and in Vagrant, Windows and Yarn don't play along well with the symlinks, because by default Yarn and Node will try and make symlinks within this node modules, and the Windows doesn't support symlinks very well, so you end up having to do some extra stuff to get that working. So keep that in mind if you're actually trying to do that. Okay, so we actually have all of these things installed now. So let's install the infrastructure. So one thing you need to do is install Mongo. So let's do this. Let's do sudo cache search MongoDB. Try and find the one that's actually the server. We scan these. Looks like it's just this one or the server here. So let's try installing this package. I'm also going to try and install the client packages because those are also useful too. So we'll install this. This should install Mongo. And most of your Linux OSs will have Mongo available as a package. I'm not actually even sure which version this is installing. I'll try and figure that out in a bit. But the Mongo version you get from installing them this way might be a bit too old in Ubuntu. On the other hand, I don't think Lichess actually uses any really new features from Mongo in terms of its basic stuff that it runs. So even slightly older Mongos should be able to run Lichess just fine. So now that we have Mongo here, I'm going to actually double check that Mongo is running. It is. And Mongo by default actually runs just locally and allows you to connect locally. So you can actually type in Mongo Lichess to connect, and now we're connected. And I don't actually ever remember any Mongo commands, but you can look up Mongo commands and actually run them here to access your database. So if you can connect to Mongo using something like this, and this command basically is the client, which connects to Mongo, and this tells you the database name you're going to use, which is Lichess is the name of the database we use for Lichess, and that connects directly. So this is a nice little way of just double checking that you're actually running Mongo and that you can connect to it appropriately. All right. Let's also look for Redis. We also need Redis. Let's try to do this. Okay, Redis server. Here we go. The nice thing about using Ubuntu is by default when you install these sort of networked server packages, any good resources, I'm going to choose Mongo instead of Postgres. Yeah, let's not go there too much. Both are great databases. I use Postgres almost exclusively in my day job, and Lichess runs on Mongo. So you can choose to decide what you want to do. Choose which version of that you think is worthwhile. The nice thing about using something like Ubuntu and installing them from packages like this is it automatically sets them up to run automatically. So from here on out, Mongo and Redis will be running automatically for us, which is kind of nice in our development environment. If you install them other ways, you may have to use systemctl, enable Mongo, and then some version of this service file here, and then systemctl start. Something like that as well too. But regardless, you need to make sure they're both running in the background. Okay, so we have all of this stuff here. If we've done everything correctly, these 4 commands should just work. So we're going to start with this. This command basically just checks out the code from GitHub. The recursive just makes sure that you're getting all of the sub-dependencies as well too that we check out. So from that perspective, this is what you typically use to set up. And if you already have Git cloned like this, then you can do that. I assume that most people here know how to use Git and know approximately the right workflow for themselves in terms of how to use a fork and how to make branches and how to do that sort of stuff. If you don't know how to do that and you'd like to learn how to do that, I'd recommend you come to Discord and ask the questions there. I'm not going to cover it here because this isn't a channel about Git, and I don't want to also show off how little I know about Git itself. When this command is done, you should have a directory named Lila wherever you check this out. So we'll just go into that directory. Then I can use build, and let's stop and talk briefly about this UE build command. So the Lila directory looks like this. There we go. The UE directory contains all the user information, the user interface information for the front end. So this is sort of where all the CSS lives, this is where all the TypeScript lives, etc. The app and modules directory is where the Scala lives. So for right now, when we run UE build, we're actually running a script in the UE directory, and I'm going to quickly look at that script for you. So let's look at build. So build is just a bash script, and all it's actually doing for you is just running a bunch of commands over and over and over again. So Lila is, and let's actually back out of that really quickly. Lila is actually very heavily modularized. Man, I can't pronounce that word. There's lots of nice modules. So if you look in the UE directory, you'll see there's a lot of different modules. And if you look in, say let's look in the Swiss one. You'll notice that inside the Swiss one, we actually have our own package.json there, as well as some other config and then a source directory. So basically, the JavaScript and CSS that are useful for the Swiss tournaments are all sort of self-contained inside of that directory. If you're talking about, I don't know, let's look at a different one here, the game. So if you look in game, same sort of thing. You'll notice that the package directory looks very similar. It's got package.json, it's got CSS, it's got source. So all the TypeScript and CSS for that particular module are within that subdirectory. And it's done that way to try and make sure that we decouple the appropriate dependencies and it makes it easier to maintain. The problem with that is typically the way you would build a node project would be to go into the directory like game, and then you type some node commands in here like npm or yarn. And I could actually do that. I could say yarn install linux dev. And if I typed enter here, this would actually look at the package.json, look at all the dependencies that it needs, so these ones, right? And then it would install them for you. This build script that we've been looking at, so this build script, what it does is it does this for you for all the different apps and in the right order. So this build script is super important. It's actually somewhat difficult to get all of these exactly right. So from that perspective, this is a very useful tool. And this build is sort of a complete build. I think it does incremental building in terms of if things haven't changed, it won't rebuild stuff. But if things have changed, it'll sort of rebuild it from scratch from the start. So it's sort of the big build commands. Type that in. /UE/build, and then it goes through the process of doing a bunch of different things for you. So while we wait for this, I'll answer some questions. So yes, Pop Array, it should be uploaded as a video on demand. We'll probably also upload it to YouTube as well, I would expect. Why not to use Lerna? I don't know. I actually learned about Lerna last year, and Lerna is actually quite great. And so maybe it would be useful. I think one of the reasons why we don't use Lerna is because the primary devs are actually fairly competent, and they also are building these sorts of simple little scripts like this is actually quite easy. So they've chosen to do things in a little bit more of a manual way and then automate it because it allows us to control every step of the process. But Lerna is definitely something that I think we should consider long term. So it's definitely an interesting potential there, and I can't answer the question better than that. So definitely a valid question, though. Lerna would be great. One of the things that Lichess tries to do is tries to be very minimal in terms of its builds. So it tries to build things that are as minimal as possible. And so from that perspective, there might be some differences between a Lerna build and what we get out of this as well too. It is possible to become a contributor. You just have to make a contribution. I believe that's the definition of contributor, right? Thinking Pizza has asked me, do we use a front-end development frameworks like Vue or Svelte or whatever? The same thing I just said. So Lichess, and specifically Thibaut, is very, very keen on trying to make Lichess as light as possible in your browser. And in fact, if we go to twitter.com/Lichess, I'm going to find you a tweet that we tweeted recently about. Let's see if I can find it here. Blah 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 blah. Oh come on! This wasn't that long ago. Here we go. This one. Couldn't resist trimming the front-end code even more, and the entire homepage now fits in 110 kilobytes, including 43 kilobytes of JS, which is really impressive in my opinion. The amount of JS that's required to run Lichess is super small, and so from that perspective, that's the reason why we don't actually use Vue or React or anything else like that. We do, however, use a library called Snab DOM, 2 E's. This is the virtual DOM library that Vue uses internally. So this is a dependency of Vue. So from that perspective, we actually use this one. It's one of the fastest, simplest, smallest virtual DOM libraries. And so we actually do use this, and we use a lot of the same development patterns that you would see in a Vue or JS. So we actually do have a concept of sort of like a reactive style stack for some of these things where there's data, and when it changes, we re-render the virtual DOM. The entire site is not built that way. When you actually load the homepage of Lichess, you actually get some HTML that's delivered to it that looks like this. But in some ways, a lot of the other things that sort of happen here, some of these things like say this one and stuff like that, is done in a very similar fashion. But for example, in addition, the other one I'll show you now is chessground, GitHub. This is the JavaScript library that is what actually renders the screens. We talked about this earlier. This is just basically raw TypeScript with SVG, effectively. And it's very heavily optimized. Interestingly enough, something people don't often realize about this is the very first version of chessground was actually implemented by our mobile developer in the mobile app. It was fast enough and interesting enough that we actually then took it and started using it directly in Lichess as well too. And it's just literally the board, the arrows, and the piece rendering. It doesn't do any of the stuff surrounding it. For that, we actually have all these other files. I agree that affecting development speed is a concern, but right now we have one developer who's full-time, Thibaut, and if you can keep up with Thibaut in his harder development environment, let me know. I'd like to hire you. Serious. Serious offer. Because Thibaut is incredibly efficient and productive developer. And so from that perspective, keeping him happy is more important right now than keeping the other potential developers happy. On the other hand, we're also trying to start to keep the other potential developers happy as well too. So I'd like to start having more people involved in the development process. So if there is a way for us to help you do that, if you find that some aspect of the development is hindering you from actually participating, please feel free to bring that up, either in streams like this, in the Discord, or on GitHub, to just say, hey, I would be much more likely to contribute if we did a few things like that. I can't say we'll do and implement every possible suggestion you make, but that is definitely one of the things we can do. Okay, so this finished. Yay! Let's go back to the instructions. The next one we're going to have to do is actually run this .lila command. So if we look in the directory, there is a Lila script as well too. And what this does is it starts SBT with the appropriate information that's needed to do it. And previously we didn't have this, and it was much harder to start SBT, but this makes it very easy. I'm not actually going to run this quite yet because there's one particular problem that we have here, which is that I'm running this VM with 1 gig of memory and 2 virtual CPUs, which is not nearly enough to develop on Lila. You're going to need far more than that. So I'm going to actually restart this Vagrant and give it more resources. So Vagrant halt is the way you stop the VM. File size is practically irrelevant, Mr. True Gamer. That's not true for mobile phones and third world countries. I should say non-North American countries or non-European countries who have much slower networks. In contexts like that, file size is still incredibly relevant. So yeah, if you're Silicon Valley and you're targeting corps in the US, fair. You can download your 2 gigs of CSS and have fun with it. But if you're trying to be a chess site that's slim and light and for everyone in the world, file size is actually super important. And that is something that Lichess takes very seriously, is the fact that we want to be as usable for some kid growing up with a slow internet connection, living in the middle of Africa or wherever else you might be living that has a slower internet connection. We want to make sure that things are fast. And the Thinking Pizza is also very correct. The compilation time for JavaScript is actually very important. The speed at which Lichess actually renders that very first page is very important to us. And so bringing that file size down actually helps the browser parse it and compile it and start the process much faster. Okay, back to here. Let's do this. We're going to give it some more resources, and Lucas is going to make fun of me for flexing again. So in here, we're going to give this 8. And what's 1024 times 8 is 8192. I'm going to give it 8 gigs of RAM and 8 virtual CPUs. Oh, it's complaining again because I didn't name this variable correctly. There we go. So Black Jumbo, while this is booting up, Black Jumbo asks a very important question here, which is how is scalability managed during a tournament or yearly Blitz arena? How do you manage resources in advance? What kind of monitoring systems are in place? So we have, thanks to Lucas, who is the one who's answering this question, we have great monitoring, honestly, in my opinion. We have better monitoring than most of the corporations I've worked for. And so we know exactly what's going on for a lot of the different aspects in Lichess. And we made heavy use of that during the initial COVID months when we were struggling with some of the growth that we did to actually diagnose the problems we were having and get stuff in place and fix the bugs. Scalability in Lichess is actually done slightly differently than most modern organizations. We don't have a microservices architecture. So we don't have a ton of little Lilas running a bunch of different little servers, and we don't have a ton of little Lila WSs running a bunch of different servers. We actually use more of a monolithic design. And that's a situation where, interestingly enough, the Thinking Pizza point that he made earlier, which is that developer productivity is important. This is an area where we actually make the choice to prioritize developer productivity over the latest and greatest, newest, fanciest, shiniest way of doing things. So as of right now, we haven't run into our ceiling in terms of scaling that way, and we have tons of room on our current servers, so we can probably handle quite a bit more traffic for some period of time here, using basically this monolithic design. It's not 100% monolithic. It's not one process on one server. We actually do have certain services which run on different servers. So there's Lila, WS, Lila Tablebase, Lila Open Explorer. So we have a bunch of different things, but each of those things basically takes some specific feature from Lichess and runs it on its own server. And so each of them is sort of its own little monolith. But it's actually worked really well for us. Okay, so supposedly this is booted. And so we should have, we do, Mr. True Gamer. In fact, if you're not familiar with Lichess, we actually publish our costs. So if you go to lichess.org/costs, you can actually see a spreadsheet where we actually show you all of our monthly costs, how much it costs to run Lichess, etc. here. And yes, we do get enough donations to cover this. So if you're interested in how much it costs to run Lichess right now, here you go. You can dig into that. Okay, there we go. We have a bit more resources now. So let's remember to use java.use, remember to use nvm.use to make sure we have the right versions of all the software. Now we should be able to run Lila. In fact, I forgot to do something else in this vagrant, which will be a very important thing to talk about soon after this. But we'll talk about this right now. So one of the most frequent questions we get on the Discord right now is how to run Leela in a virtual machine. And I won't lie, part of the reason why I chose to run Leela in Vagrant on a virtual machine was to somewhat address that question. So oftentimes that question actually comes because people are trying to redeploy a new version of Lichess. So they want to, for whatever reason, they're decided that, you know what, forget it. I don't want to play any other chess players except the people who are in my block. So I'm going to make a version of Lichess that runs directly in, and I'm only going to share it with my 5 friends, and the 5 of us are going to play on that version of Lichess. And then they come and they ask us for help on how to deploy it. And right now, we don't support that officially. We don't support secondary or tertiary or whatever deployments of Lichess. And there's really only one reason why, which is just that it's not really a good use of our time. It doesn't have good value for the donations we get. It doesn't have good value for the volunteering hours that we're using to actually bother with that. It's not because you can't. You can. If you want to run a version of Lichess on your own, go for it. But when you come to ask for help in the Discord and other places, we're not likely to spend much time trying to help you. However, there have been quite a few people who have been saying, well, I don't have Linux, I want to run it on Mac, or I want to run it in Windows, and I want to be able to use something like a Vagrant or a Docker or something like that to be able to help with development. So if you are planning on helping us develop Lichess and you want to work on that, please feel free to come to those channels and ask for that kind of help. I think that's a perfectly valid reason for doing it. But know that our primary goal is to support the native development. So from that perspective, we're not going to spend a lot of time trying to help you do certain things. Okay, so once you run this /Leela, blah, 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 eventually it'll get to this Leela prompt, which we got to. We'll type in compile, and it'll take quite a few minutes here to compile. So one of the things that's important to talk about is if you are trying to run Lichess and to do all of these different things for in a development environment, you actually need to understand your networking environment relatively well, because we don't take care of automatically doing networking setup for you. We assume that you're running Lichess directly on your own machine and you can connect to localhost or 127.0.0.1 and you can connect to the ports there. And we assume that in addition to your browser being able to connect to those particular ports, we also assume that your Leela can connect to Redis and can connect to Mongo and all those sorts of different things. And if you're trying to run this on a sort of more complicated environment on a VM, you need to make sure that you set up your firewalls and networking appropriately for you there. And I'm not going to cover that in detail today because A, I'm not a sysadmin or DevOps, so that sort of stuff isn't my wheelhouse, but also because there's so many different ways of doing it. Covering one would be kind of pointless. I will, however, cover how to do it in this context of this Vagrant, and that's the thing that I actually forgot to do. And so as soon as this is done, we're going to try and load this, and it's not going to work because I haven't actually set it up so that I can connect to 9663 in my Vagrant. So, Black Jungle, yeah, I'd like to do that. The original plan to do that was to use my Surface and draw on it, but the last time I shared my Surface screen, it shared my personal email address, which was amazing. And so I quickly cut away from that, although now that personal email address has been shared, you can find it elsewhere, so it's not really the biggest deal in the world. Maybe I'll just switch back and actually do that. And file your taxes. It really isn't that hard. If you live in Canada, simple tax is great. It's free. Well, it's not free. It's pay what you want, so there's no excuse. Just do it. This is going to take a full 5 minutes to run here, so I'm going to have to figure out other things to potentially talk about while we're doing this. Lakin commits tax fraud. Man, I pay my taxes every year. I personally, yeah, let's not make this a political statement. I'll stop there. But yeah, so one of the other things that we've had problems with people running into is trying to run, is what in TypeScript? My taxes? Okay, yay, this is done. Okay, so I should be able to, after compile, I should be able to type run. And it should do some more things. I'm not exactly sure why there's like a million different versions of running here, but this all looks fairly good. Once we get to this point where you see this particular line, you should be able to connect to this URL, but it won't work because of networking. So Control C, Control D, exit, vagrant, halt. We're going to shut down this vagrant and we're going to set up the networking. So Lichess is written in both TypeScript and Scala, and Rust, and some C++, depending on what you call Lichess, but yeah, lots of different languages. That's what Stockfish is written in, and the variant code for Stockfish is written in C++ thanks to Todovsky. So, yes, C++, no COBOL. That's Lucas's department. He's the old man. Okay, so Vagrant makes forwarding ports fairly easily. Someone asked what's in Rust. Let's go back to Lichess/source. Rust. There you go. That's what's in Rust. And Vagrant, let's look up some stuff here. Vagrant for multiple points. How do we do this again? Blah, blah, blah. You just do it more than once. Okay, I'm going to also preemptively do this one. So what this says is it says that inside the guest, if something listens on 9663, that it will also forward this so that we can, on the host, connect to it with 9663. And that's what's necessary for us to be able to connect to this URL. Actually, Black Jumbo, I'm pretty sure Thibaut did learn to write Scala while he was writing Lichess. In fact, something people don't actually realize is that the name Lila, which is the name of this repository here, stands for Lichess in Scala. And the very first version of Lichess was PHP, and I don't know what version of JavaScript they were using, but he went through something like he used PHP, maybe raw PHP, and then he was using something else like Symfony or Cake. I don't remember which one he was using, some other framework, and then he eventually got really sick of all those, as everyone does, because PHP is an awful language, and I'm not sorry for saying that on stream. And he eventually moved on and found Scala and decided to use it, and he's been very happy with that choice ever since. Scala has been a great language for him. Okay, this is running again. Let's go back in here. And in fact, I think you can find, Todovsky, that's a very interesting point. I think you can actually find the old Lila repositories. Is it the same as Lila Chess 0? No, it's not the same name. So Thibaut has a ton of old repositories, and I think do something like this. some old PHP stuff a long time ago. And one time I was looking through here and I found the old Lichess PHP repository. Let's see if we can find that again. Won't look for too long. But I'll do that while we're running these things. There you go. So this is an old version of Lichess. I don't remember what language it was written in. Yeah, here we go. Look at this! Old PHP. Symphony 2, that's what he was using. Oh, right. See this? This is an error you get when you forget that you have to run these Java commands and NVM commands to make sure you have the environment set up. And then you run Lila. This time it should work. Oh man, PHP. I still have nightmares about PHP. I've heard it's gotten better, but I haven't touched it in a decade, so I don't plan on it either. Alright, so compile, let's try that again. Okay, while we're waiting, I'm actually gonna go find another thing here. Blog. We want the blog. Where's the blog? Here's the blog. More. So some time ago, I forget exactly when it was, we posted a tech update. How long ago was this? This one? That's too old. Maybe it was this one. Yeah, here we go. This is what I was looking for. So in terms of architecture, this is one of the most recent things we published in terms of our general server architecture. This is not the code architecture, this is the server architecture, but this actually kind of helps explain some of the actual code architecture as well too. So this is the best figure I have right now. And if one of the other people from Lichess can all find me that, I think, something pretentious, can you find me the link to that document you found from Discord a week and a half ago that had some architecture stuff in it as well, and link that in the chat? Thank you. Okay. So now we've gotten to this line again. We should be able to reload this page, and hey, look! We have Lichess running. Look at us, lichess.dev. Yay! So that's the basics of how to get Lichess running. Some things you should know once you get to this point. You can register an account on the dev site without much information. So you can say Lichess, this, try not to share emails, at any password, and you can click the agrees and register. Oh, it doesn't like example.com, so try Lakin.ca. Oh, why is that not? But good. I'm going to quickly switch screens to I'm going to quickly switch screens so that you guys can't see this, and then I'm going to sign up for an account using a real email address and get back to it. So give me 2 seconds here. Okay, so you can sign up using an account like that, and then you have an account. One thing you'll notice though is down here we actually have a reconnecting symbol, and that's something that's important as well too. And if you go back down here, that's this step. In order to actually use Lichess as a chess site, we need to have the WebSocket server also running, and that will be our first little sort of introduction into. Let's see here. Let's put this down here into some of the Lichess architecture, and that is that per page that you connect to on Lichess, there is, how do I find that? It's WebSocket. One WebSocket connection that's made. And that WebSocket connection actually is to a different service. So Lila itself does not handle the WebSockets. Those WebSockets are handled by this Lila WS repository, which is this one. And you can think of this repository as sort of a fan-out repository. So Lila itself runs the actual core, it runs the chess games, it runs the basics of the chat and stuff like that. But when people connect to the WebSocket, they connect to Lila WS. And so when Lichess receives a game move from one of the game players, it'll do what it needs to do to update all of that information internally, and then it will actually send that move back out. But it actually receives it from Lila WS and sends it back out to Lila WS. And Lila WS is what decides, oh, I've got 5 million players watching Magnus play, I have to take this move and broadcast it to everybody. And so that sort of is one way we've actually separated out concerns to allow us to scale a little bit more, is that the work that's required just purely for the networking process of processing as many WebSocket connections as we have is separated out into a separate server. And so we need to actually get that server running. What's the name of this? Let's do that. Okay, so we're going to get this one running as well too. And you'll notice that if you look at it, it actually connects to, if we go back here, it actually connects to 9664, and it doesn't show this anywhere, but it connects to 9664, which is why I had to have that, why I added that extra Vagrant file forwarding for 9664, and that's because your browser actually needs to connect directly to the WebSocket server. So it connects both to Lila, and it connects to the WebSocket server directly. And so if you're running this on in a Docker or a VM or somewhere else, you need to set up that networking appropriately so that your browser can connect to both of those. Additionally, as detailed out here, Lila and Delilah actually use Redis internally to communicate with each other. So they use the Redis publication subscription model to communicate with each other. And so they individually, internally need to be able to connect to Redis. Okay, going back to this. Get clone. On this one. And I also need to run Java, so we have Java available. Let's go here and run this. Thibaut actually he's tried Rust, and he actually prefers Scala, just to be clear. Rust is good, but Thibaut is a really big fan of immutability and functional programming paradigms. And Rust is more about systems level programming and allowing you to know when things are mutable or not, but allowing you to still have mutable things. And Thibaut actually would much prefer to just use the immutable kind of concept and use functional programming. That's why he likes Scala and the JVM, because the JVM actually provides an excellent platform on which to create many small objects and then garbage collect them later. The UE application does not talk to Lila at all. It does talk to Lila, but not for the WebSocket piece. And all of our general communication, he loves Haskell, but I don't think Haskell is the most practical language for him to use for it. But he loves Haskell for sure. But anyways, going back to the WebSocket thing, all the communication about what's the word I'm looking for here? Communication about the game state, chat, stuff like that, all goes to the WebSockets. Okay, so if we go back to Lichess here, now we actually don't have that reconnecting. We can actually potentially play a game. So let's actually do, whoops, that's the wrong button. I want a new incognito window. put that down there. Let's go here. And I am also going to quickly switch away while I create another account that I can play with. And then I'll be right back. And I am back here. That's fine. Okay, so now that we have two accounts, we can actually click this, and because we have the WebSockets running in the background, eventually we'll get paired. And we can actually play a game. Pretty sure that'll happen. The pairing can be slow in the context of just two people though as well too. There we go. Now we have a game. So now I can play games against each other. Yay, look at this. There. And so if we actually look at this, inspect this, and let's do something different. Let's move this to a completely different screen. So I have the opponent's thing open on a different screen. We'll reload this. That's fine. It should be fine. It'll reconnect. We can go here. We can click messages. And now we can actually see the messages that are being sent. In this screen here. And if I go to my other page where I have the other thing, if I make a move, you'll notice the move comes in. So this is how Lichess communicates. If I chat with my opponent, you'll notice that the chat comes in there as well too. So in general, most of the stuff that you're using for Lichess comes through the WebSockets. All right, I'm going to resign that game for now. You also saw the winner, the resign, everything else sort of came through that WebSocket. Okay. That is the basics of how to set up a Lichess development environment. There is more. If we go back here, you can set up the fishnet, which is what's required in order for you to be able to play against the computer. You can set up various other pieces as well too. To go back and answer a question that Todovsky answered a little while ago is that we actually have a couple of interesting things here that talk about... Where did that go? So in here... So here. Thibaut is currently switched to using something called Bloop for his development, which gives you IDE-like features in Vim. And I would highly recommend that if you were using, and Bloop actually is a language server, so you can actually use it with things like Visual Studio Code as well too. So it doesn't require just Vim, but you should definitely take some time to set up your Scala editor so that you have the appropriate language feature services set up from that perspective as well too. So to answer Todovsky, yes, getting this set up properly is really nice, super interesting. Okay, I'm done. This is a very good place to sort of stop, have a small break. I'm not going to actually leave, I mean just to chat with you guys, or you folks. So this is the primary thing I wanted to get through today, was to get through a setup of the development environment, talk about which repos were used, how to go through things, how I recommend doing things. I still have some more time and would be happy to stick around for say another half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe even closer to an hour if we were actually planning to do, people wanted to go through more things after this. So I guess my first question is what would people look for next? Like what would be the most interesting thing for you next in terms of, and what I want to focus on so far is I want to talk about what are the impediments to getting people to contribute. Okay, so if you're someone who's thinking, yeah, I love Lichess, I'd love to contribute, I know technology, doesn't matter what level you know technology. What are the things that I could cover either today in this stream or moving forward in future streams that would really help you out? Like what is it? Is it development environment setup? Mobile dev env. Okay, mobile dev env. We can potentially cover that today a little bit. At the very least, Mr. True Gamer, if we go back to here, the mobile dev env is these three repositories, primarily this one, okay? And the primary developer for this is very active on the issues. He's not active in Discord. So if you want to get help set up here, you can go here and file, if you're having problems getting it set up, go here and file a GitHub issue asking for help about setting it up. He's actually told us that you can do that in that particular context. Core modules, okay, yep. Black jumble, yep. In terms of that black jumble, that's actually kind of the next step that I was planning on doing would be to just generally talk about how the code is organized a little bit more. I don't know. So this one here, okay. We'll bring this up. I did not make this. Someone else did. But this is someone's school project, I think. And they went through and reviewed Lichess. And this is one of my most favorite diagrams ever. And so, which dev is what, Cormac? I do have a face. Yes, Cormac, I do. Okay, this is actually somewhat useful. It's a little bit old, but this has some amount of information that's quite useful in terms of the general module dependencies. These are basically how the dependencies of the individual modules go. And if we go down far enough, we actually end up with sort of this kind of information flow architecture as well too, which is the best pre-built architecture diagram I've seen recently. It's not exactly correct anymore because I think Lila WS, the WebSocket thing, postdates this, and so there's another Lila WebSocket that's well involved in here. But this is actually a fairly good way to get a handle on fairly recent architecture for Lichess development. So that's useful. Okay. Going back to that, so probably walk through core modules. Yep, that's good. The mobile development. The mobile dev env is something that I don't know how to set up, so I will look into how to set that up, Mr. True Gamer, and consider doing that in a future stream. But for right now, I'm not competent enough at setting it up to do this quickly on live, basically. If people are interested, I can definitely do the very basic code for Lila specifically. So for this repository specifically, I actually do understand how the code is organized somewhat, and so I can actually help you get that set up, or go through a very not get that set up. I can help go through just a very simple description of how the code is organized and sort of where you can start from, etc. So that'll be the next thing I would plan on doing if someone doesn't have a better suggestion. Debugging, yeah, debugging's a good one as well too. What's the PR/CR process? That's a very good question. So, in general, and the other question we had a little while ago was linking some issues that would be a good first example contribution. So, going back to, that was Caron 1989. The issues are all here, and we actually have a good first issue label. There's not a lot in here, but they exist. So these are some good first issues if you want to try and get some. These are explicitly marked that way. The other label that I would recommend considering to use is this wanted label, which are listed of features that we definitely want. So someone has actually, the gatekeeper for the repos is Thibaut, and Nicholas is sort of a sub-gatekeeper, and I do a little bit of stuff there, but not a lot. But the real key question here is that because we are such a small dev team and we have such limited time, we are very protective of how much code that we actually accept into the repository, because maintaining code is infinitely harder than building it to begin with. And so if we need to scale to 200,000 users next year, right, every piece of code that we accept in is something that we need to make sure works in that context. And so from that perspective, the biggest impediment, in my opinion, to getting a PR, to getting a pull request or a change request merged, is just making sure that the piece of thing that you're doing is something we want. And that's really important, in my opinion. And this wanted labels, the labels for wanted actually help you understand that you definitely know for certain this is something that you want. So from that perspective, the going through this lesson and finding something that's important to you is actually a very good set of initial features. If you have an idea, say a feature request or something you think would be useful, rather than starting to work on it just immediately on your own, I'd recommend coming to the Discord and asking in general, or potentially one of the other development channels, or filing an issue here about the idea of what you want to say. I think this would be a great thing, asking it here, and getting confirmation from Thibaut this is something you want. As an example, the 45/45 League, which I'm part of, let's see here, it's actually is open and is assigned to Lakin. This one here. So the 45-45 league, we frequently commit our games, so we spend a lot of time chatting the games. And currently, Lichess has a 200 message backlog limit, and that prevents us from going back and rereading the chat after the game is over. So for some of the high-profile games, we wanted a way to be able to actually log all of the messages so we could display them. And so as an example, one of our members came here and actually suggested this. And the important piece, the reason why I'm using this particular ticket as a example is because it's a very good ticket in terms of it. I just say very good, it's good enough. He explained the context of why we wanted it, so he explained what we wanted and why we were going to use it, and then made the request and said, hey, would this be something that you would consider accepting? Right? And specifically in this particular case, he had me as a backup offering to help code it, and I actually need to work on this at some point in time. And this might be a future stream. Maybe I'll stream myself actually working on this particular feature. And that's sort of the right way to approach this, is to treat it as sort of a, hey, I kind of want to see this done. Either you can do it or I'm willing to work on it. If you're willing to work on it, saying you're willing to work on it, it goes a long way. And then waiting until someone like Thibaut says, yeah, this is fine, go for it. And so for this perspective, this one actually should have, I'm not logged in this should have the label wanted, because we actually would want it. So that's a good example of how to start the process in terms of actually figuring out how to make a pull request. Real Ulysses, you asked if we plan to do these on some kind of schedule. If people like these and we find them useful and we're getting a lot of value out of them, and by that value I mean we're getting more engagement from the potential developers that we have on our site, then I definitely think that I would start doing these more regularly. I don't know how often I could do them because it does take a fair bit of preparation to get to this point, but I definitely would consider doing them, and I'm going to do my best to try and convince some of the other developers that we have on Lichess to potentially join me on stream, even if it's just in the chat, but potentially join me on stream to actually do a little bit more of an AMA in terms of asking questions and answering them for that as well too, because like I said at the beginning, I'm a developer for Lichess. I've done a little bit of work, but if you say go here and you look at contributors and you look at the contributors here, my name is not anywhere near the top. So yes, I've done a little bit, but you have to scroll down a little ways before you find my name. Oh, look here, I'm number 17. So from that perspective, I haven't done nearly as much as Thibaut or Nicholas has done, or any of these other developers here too. So I'd love to have some of them on the stream to help answer more questions as well. We don't have a good roadmap right now, Black Jumbo. Even at listed destinations is probably, we have some sort of internal stuff that we have on our plate, but nothing very specifically. And I think that's actually something we could do better of, is to have a better roadmap. But honestly, sometimes that can be difficult because a lot of the things that we do is in response to very current needs. So from that perspective, it's hard to promise that, oh yeah, we're looking at doing feature XYZ in 6 months, because we really don't know if that feature XYZ in 6 months is completely relevant at all. So, and if you want to participate in that process of helping define that, being active on the GitHub and the issues, being active in the Discord would be the places I'd recommend. Definitely being active there. Just scrolling back through these questions again to quickly make sure I haven't. I agree that onboarding would be smoother with a working Vagrant or Docker Todosky from that perspective, but I'm not in a position to be able to make and maintain those right now. And like people said, Vagrant is not necessarily the best option either because of its overhead in terms of resources. So from that perspective, I can easily give Vagrant 8 gigs of RAM and 8 CPUs and be fine on my machine. But not everybody has that facility, which is part of the reason why it's a little bit difficult to onboard people like that. But I definitely agree with that. That's why Docker, I think, would be the better choice of the two. And I believe Lucas actually said that he would consider actually doing some of the Docker setup as well. So from that perspective, maybe that's something we could actually do. Great, I'm glad to hear that, Black Jumbo. Please join the Discord, ask questions there. We're active. We're a little bit snarky sometimes, but if you can get past that, you'll fit right in. You can be snarky back to me. That's the thing I'll tell you. Maybe not snarky to everyone else, just me. I think I'm not going to go through much more in terms of trying to go through the code and explain the code today, both because it's getting closer to the time where I want to kind of finish up, I would rather spend more time on it than just a quick 10-minute tour. So from that perspective, I think I'll probably skip that and probably call this done. So I'm here to chat for a few more minutes. If people have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if not, I'll probably wind down in the next few minutes. Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea, Cormac. Running Stockfish can be quite resource intensive. Depends on what you're running it on. Stockfish is very configurable. It'll happily use all of your resources if you tell it to. Except for RAM. It's kind of hard to make it use all your RAM, but it'll use all of your cores, and for sure. Alright. Like I said, the most needed issues are listed in the issues, and will be probably under some sort of label here. Bugs, we need all the bugs fixed. There's a bunch of bugs fixed, that'd be great. Wanted, definitely, would be things that we definitely want. And then don't do any of the ones that marked as nope. That's probably a bad idea. Foundational ones are probably big things as well too. And then good first issue. So basically, all of these GitHub labels are where you should spend your time if you're looking for a most needed issue right now. And if you're planning on working on something, it's best to update the GitHub issue and let them know, just to make sure no one else is. No use wasting your work, or just to make sure the issue's still relevant. Maybe it's been fixed randomly throughout. Well, how many scaling issues were revealed with a spike in users this year? What was the biggest one? There were 2 primary issues that were revealed with the spike. Sorry, three big ones that I'll talk about. I don't know how to categorize them in terms of what the biggest one was. Because we're a monolith, and because we have Leela runs on a single server. I think there was 3, Lucas. I'm going to go through 3. And because Leela runs on a local server, the first problem was running out of ports. You only have 65,536, is that the number? You have 8 bits worth, 8 bits, is that right? 8 bits, 16 bits? You have some number of bits worth of ports on a server, on a single IP address. And we ran into some issues on some servers related to that, and we had to scramble to actually improve the different ways of connecting between the servers to do that. The next one was that once we had that up as well too, the way we were connecting to Mongo was actually inefficient, and so for a very long time we were actually running into issues where just suddenly things would just go nuts and we wouldn't understand why, and it looked like a networking issue. And it turned out that we were just running out of connections available to Mongo from Leela. So Leela uses a async connection to Mongo, but even with that we actually have enough threads that we need quite a few open. I think it was limited to 10 or 20 or something like that, and we eventually figured out that we had to up that to like 50 or something. I forget what the actual number was, but that was another one. And then the tournament pairing code. So the initial tournament pairing code was actually quite heavy. And in addition, because all of our tournaments were starting on the hour, we had an issue as well too, where basically on the hour during peak time, we'd have thousands and tens of thousands of people trying to get paired in a tournament. And we had limits on the amount of time that the tournament code would try and pair, and it was actually running out, and so tournaments would get busted. And there was a week or 2 period there where we were scrambling trying to get that optimized and figure it out. And that one, we optimized that both in code, so Thibaut sat down for a few days and just completely optimized that code, so it was running much faster. And then we still had some problems with that one as well too. And the networking stuff that we ended up getting rid of helped us that way, as well as the fact that we just literally bought bigger servers. We just literally said, we've got so much traffic right now that we should just, and we have the donations, we're covering it, so we just decided to buy slightly bigger servers. And so we just upgraded our servers. And all of these things that we put into it actually ended up putting us into a point where right now, hourly tournaments at our peak times are barely even a blip, as I recall, on our radar right now. So we actually have a lot of growth room now. Although we might run into that port issue again fairly soon. That seems to be like the most likely one we'll run into if we start growing. I don't think they need more attention right now, Mr. True Gamer. We know how to deal with the port one, and I think we can probably scale to probably double our size. I think that was the last double or triple our size was the last estimate we looked at. So from that perspective, I think we're actually in a really good position from a technical debt and scalability perspective right now. That's my personal opinion. Some of the other developers might disagree, but that's my personal opinion on that one. Did I miss any other questions here? No, it doesn't look like it. At some point, the answer is more memory. At some point, yeah, you just throw more money at the hardware. Great, Lucas agrees with me, so we're on the same page then. Awesome. Well, this has actually been fun. I've actually enjoyed this, so I appreciate everyone who has shown up. It's been great to have you here. It's been great to have this conversation. I'm glad that some of you have actually been motivated to potentially get it set up. I think that's great. I will definitely consider scheduling another one in which we'll go through some of the further things where I take you through some of my development workflow when I work on Lichess. Yeah, Corona 1988, 1989, that is what we do. But going back, we'll take you through some of my development workflow, and we'll also take you through the basic organization of the code. So we'll go through all of that and work on that, and sort of try and answer some questions. And in that context as well, I may even try and pick a small issue and try and solve it on stream. So we may do that as well too. All right, thank you all. I'm going to shut down the stream now, and I appreciate you all being here. Thanks.